There's a moment a lot of people don't see coming, especially if they've never been a man who's been through enough relationships to stop romanticizing them. It's the moment an older man realizes he doesn't miss dating. He misses the idea of it. He misses the version of love that existed before he learned what it can cost. And that's why this topic makes people uncomfortable, because it doesn't sound like a heartbreak story. It sounds like a resignation story, like a man quietly closing the door, not out of anger, but out of clarity. Like he looked at the numbers, looked at the pattern, looked at the emotional overhead, and decided the juice isn't worth the squeeze. So when you hear a man say, "I'd rather be alone," and you instantly assume he's bitter or traumatized or damaged, you might be missing what's actually happening. Some men don't opt out because they hate women. They opt out because they finally love peace more than they love potential. And for a lot of people, that's a foreign language, because society sells dating like it's always the answer. If you're lonely, date. If you're bored, date. If you want purpose, date. If you want meaning, date. And if you stop dating, people treat it like you've failed, like you've given up, like you've lost your confidence. But for many older men, quitting dating isn't a sign of weakness. It's a sign they finally stopped lying to themselves about what they can tolerate. If you've ever wondered why some men get older and seem almost allergic to dating, like the video, because this conversation is going to explain it without the usual jokes, without the bitterness, and without pretending love is always worth it. Subscribe if you want more breakdowns that tell the truth even when it's not romantic. And if you've ever felt relief in being alone, comment peace, because I want to know how many people understand that loneliness and solitude are not the same thing. Let's start with the most important idea. Older men aren't afraid of being alone. Many of them are afraid of being disturbed. That's the shift. When you're younger, you chase experiences. You want intensity. You want to feel something. You want the rush of attraction, the late-night texts, the drama that you secretly call passion, the ego boost of being chosen, the thrill of pursuit. And you tolerate chaos because you're still building your identity. You're still proving something. You still believe the right relationship will fix something in you. When you're older, you're not chasing feelings as much as you're protecting stability. You've already felt enough. You've already been high. You've already been low. You've already had nights where you couldn't sleep because you didn't know where you stood. You've already sacrificed peace for a person who didn't appreciate it. You've already paid the emotional tax. So now, when someone enters your life, you're not asking, "Do I like them?" You're asking, "What will this cost me?" And that's not cold, that's experienced. There's a point where you've been through enough situations where you realize how much dating requires you to gamble with your peace. You gamble with your routine. You gamble with your finances. You gamble with your mental stability. You gamble with your reputation. You gamble with your time. You gamble with your emotional safety. And the older you get, the more valuable time becomes. When you're 25, wasting 3 months on the wrong person feels annoying. When you're 45, wasting 3 months feels insulting, because you can see the clock, you can see your energy, you can see what your life could look like if you just focused on your health, your career, your family, your purpose, your sleep, your sanity. And then you look at dating and realize it often demands you to trade all of that for uncertainty. And a man who's been burned enough times starts to ask a question he never asked when he was young. Is love actually the prize, or is peace the prize? That question changes everything. Now, let's zoom out and tell a third-person story, because this is easier to see when it's not personal. Victor's 52. He's not a bad man. He's not a perfect man either. He's lived. He's had relationships. He's been married. He's been divorced. He's dated. He's tried. He's done the whole thing. Victor isn't lonely. He has friends. He has a routine. He has hobbies. He goes to the gym. He has his own space. His home feels like his sanctuary. It's quiet. It's predictable. It's his. Then Victor meets someone. She's attractive. She's interesting. At first, it's light. Conversation. A few dates. But as soon as things start to get close, the familiar patterns show up. Expectations, subtle control, emotional volatility, testing, unspoken rules, pressure to be available, pressure to prove, pressure to manage. And Victor doesn't even have to argue. He can feel it. He knows the smell of it. He's lived it before. So he steps back. Not because he's scared, because he's experienced. He'd rather come home to silence than come home to tension. He'd rather sleep deeply than stay up deciphering moods. He'd rather spend his weekend recharging than negotiating someone's feelings. He'd rather eat in peace than sit across from someone who is waiting to be disappointed. And here's the part people misunderstand. Victor isn't opting out because he thinks all women are bad. He's opting out because he's learned that the wrong relationship doesn't just hurt. It drains, it destabilizes, it ages you, it turns your home into a stress chamber. So Victor chooses himself. He chooses solitude. He chooses peace. And from the outside, people call him sad. But Victor feels relieved. That relief is what people don't understand. Let me speak directly to you now. If you're a woman watching this and you're thinking, that's just bitterness, slow down. Because if you want the truth, a lot of men's bitterness is actually grief that was never processed. They're not angry that love exists. They're disappointed in how love played out for them. They're disappointed in how much they gave for how little they received. They're disappointed that the thing they were told would make them happier ended up being the source of their worst stress. And when that disappointment accumulates, a man doesn't always cry about it. He calculates. He looks at his past and sees patterns. He sees how many times he tried to communicate calmly and got punished for it. He sees how many times he tried to lead and got resented for it. He sees how many times he tried to provide and got taken for granted. He sees how many times he trusted and got played. He sees how many times he ignored red flags because he wanted to believe. At some point, he stops wanting to believe. He starts wanting to be safe. Now, if you're a man watching this and you've felt your tolerance shrink as you got older, share this with a friend who keeps telling you to get back out there, like dating is a harmless hobby. If you relate to this, comment, because I want you to know you're not the only one who feels like peace is a luxury worth protecting. And if you've ever been called emotionally unavailable when you were really just emotionally exhausted, drop that in the comments too, because that label gets thrown around like it explains everything. Here's the real reason older men opt out. It's not the absence of desire, it's the presence of cost. The cost is emotional labor. When men are younger, they don't understand how expensive emotional labor is. They think it's just part of love. They think managing constant emotional shifts is normal. They think being punished for not reading minds is normal. They think walking on eggshells is part of being a good partner. Then they get older. They start calling things by their real name. They realize that constant tension is not intimacy, it's dysregulation. They realize that unpredictability is not passion, it's instability. They realize that feeling drained all the time is not love, it's consumption. So they stop. Not because they can't love, because they finally learned what love is not supposed to feel like. And this is where the conversation gets controversial. Some men learn that dating is not designed for their peace, it's designed for their performance. They're expected to initiate, plan, pay, lead, be confident, be stable, be emotionally intelligent, be strong, be soft, be available, be ambitious, be present, be consistent, handle stress, handle mood swings, handle insecurity, handle comparison, handle expectations, handle whatever a partner hasn't healed yet. And if they fail, they're called immature, avoidant, narcissistic, or not ready. So some men decide they're tired of being graded. They'd rather be alone than be constantly evaluated. Now let's be fair. Not all relationships are like this. Some are beautiful. Some are stable. Some feel like home. Some feel like a partnership instead of a performance. But the older a man gets, the more he realizes those relationships are rare, and the more he realizes he doesn't have the energy to sort through chaos to maybe find one. Because the sorting process is brutal. Dating means opening your life to strangers, trusting people you don't know, betting on someone's potential, investing time you can't get back, learning someone's attachment style the hard way, finding out their coping mechanisms once you're already attached, discovering their unresolved pain once it's already in your house, in your phone, in your weekends, in your nervous system. And older men, they've learned that you don't get refunded for bad bets. So a lot of them stop betting. They don't hate women. They hate instability. They don't hate love. They hate losing themselves. They don't hate connection. They hate the chaos that often comes wrapped in it. That's the foundation of this entire topic. In the next chapter, we're going to talk about the specific experiences that turn hopeful men into cautious men, the kinds of relationship dynamics that make solitude feel safer, and why peace becomes the main love language for older men. Chapter 2. What usually pushes an older man over the edge isn't one catastrophic breakup. It's accumulation. It's the slow realization that the same emotional tax keeps getting charged no matter who he dates. Different personalities, same outcome, different faces, same pattern. And patterns teach faster than advice ever could. When a man is young, he still believes effort fixes things. He believes communication solves everything. He believes if he explains himself better, loves harder, stays longer, compromises more, things will work out. He believes the problem is always something he hasn't done yet. That belief keeps him dating. But experience slowly dismantles it. He starts noticing that many conflicts don't come from misunderstanding. They come from misalignment. That no amount of explaining changes someone's emotional wiring. That some people don't want peace, they want stimulation. That some people mistake chaos for chemistry. That some people are only comfortable when something feels unstable. And that's when dating starts to feel less like connection and more like exposure. There's a moment when you realize you're always the regulator. You're the one de-escalating. You're the one choosing calm language. You're the one absorbing moods. You're the one walking on eggshells so the night doesn't turn into an argument. You're the one expected to be grounded no matter how ungrounded the environment becomes. And after years of that, you don't feel strong anymore. You feel tired. You don't feel like a partner. You feel like a stabilizer. That's when solitude starts looking attractive. Because solitude doesn't test you. It doesn't punish you for being quiet. It doesn't accuse you of being distant. It doesn't require constant reassurance. It doesn't interpret your silence as rejection. It doesn't demand emotional performance. Solitude lets you breathe. My friend Aaron is 47. He's had relationships where he tried to do everything right. He communicated. He listened. He adjusted. He compromised. He apologized. He grew. And yet, no matter how much he improved, the emotional volatility never disappeared. The goalpost kept moving. If he led, he was controlling. If he pulled back, he was distant. If he spoke up, he was aggressive. If he stayed quiet, he was avoidant. And after enough time in that double bind, Aaron realized something unsettling. There was no way to win, only ways to endure. So when people ask Aaron why he doesn't date anymore, he doesn't say all this. He just says he enjoys his peace. But what he really means is he no longer wants to live inside emotional contradiction. Here's the part people don't want to hear. Many older men didn't stop dating because they failed. They stopped because they succeeded enough times to see the pattern. They dated, they committed, they tried, they learned. And what they learned wasn't that love is impossible. It was that love, as it's often practiced, is expensive. Emotionally expensive, mentally expensive, energetically expensive. When a man reaches a stage where his life finally feels stable, he becomes extremely protective of it. His routine matters, his sleep matters, his nervous system matters, his health matters, his time matters, his home matters. And dating threatens all of that, not always intentionally, but predictably. This is why older men flinch at phrases like, "You just have to put yourself out there," or "You'll find someone when you least expect it," or "Don't close your heart." Those phrases sound innocent, but to an experienced man, they translate to reopen your life to unpredictability and hope. It doesn't cost you too much this time. Hope becomes a liability. Now, let's address a misunderstanding that keeps coming up People think older men opt out because they can't get women anymore. In reality, many older men could date if they wanted to. They still get attention. They still get interest. But attention isn't the currency they care about anymore. They care about consistency. They care about emotional safety. They care about not having to brace themselves after every conversation. Let me talk directly to you if you're a woman watching this. This isn't an indictment of women as a whole. It's an explanation of why tolerance changes. Many men didn't leave dating because women were bad. They left because the emotional cost stopped making sense relative to the reward. When a man has already experienced sex, companionship, intimacy, and love, those things stop being motivating enough to outweigh chaos, especially if he's already built a fulfilling life. Sex alone isn't leverage anymore. Attraction alone isn't leverage anymore. Potential alone isn't leverage anymore. Peace is. And that's the shift people don't want to accept. If this chapter is hitting close to home, like the video because this conversation is for people who've lived long enough to stop believing slogans, share it if you know someone who keeps pressuring older men to get back out there without understanding what they're actually asking them to risk. Now let's talk about emotional exhaustion, because this is the silent killer of male desire. Emotional exhaustion doesn't look like anger. It looks like indifference. It looks like disinterest. It looks like calm detachment. It looks like a man choosing his couch, his book, his gym, his routine over another first date that feels like a job interview. And once a man tastes that calm consistently, it's very hard to convince him to trade it for uncertainty. That's why older men don't argue about dating. They disengage. They don't complain. They withdraw. They don't demand better. They opt out. In the next chapter, we're going to talk about how past relationship trauma quietly reshapes male attraction, why older men are hypersensitive to red flags, and why even small signs of instability can permanently shut a man down. Chapter 3. By the time a man reaches a certain age, his attraction system is no longer driven by fantasy. It's driven by memory. Not the nostalgic kind, the procedural kind. His body remembers what his mind doesn't want to relive. This is the part that gets misunderstood the most. People think older men are guarded because they're scared to be hurt again. That's not quite it. Fear is loud. What you're seeing in older men is calibration. Their nervous system has learned patterns and adjusted accordingly. Trauma doesn't always look like flashbacks or anger. Sometimes it looks like restraint. Let me explain that clearly. When a man has lived through enough emotional volatility, his body starts to associate certain behaviors with loss of peace. Raised voices, sudden mood shifts, passive aggression, testing, silent treatment, inconsistency, emotional flooding, even subtle things like tone changes or delayed responses. You might think he's overreacting. He's not. He's pattern matching. And this is where dating becomes almost impossible for some men, because modern dating is full of those signals. Not because people are evil, but because many people are unregulated, unhealed, and unaware. There's a point where even small signs of instability turn you off instantly. Not because you're cold, but because you know where it leads. You know the spiral. You know the conversations that never resolve. You know the emotional labor that follows. And you don't want to go there again. So your attraction system changes. You stop being drawn to intensity. You stop being impressed by charm. You stop being seduced by novelty. Those things start to feel like warnings instead of rewards. You become drawn to calm voices, predictable behavior, emotional consistency, low reactivity, self-awareness. And here's the problem. Calm doesn't sell well in dating culture. Dating apps reward excitement, drama, hot and cold dynamics, emotional spikes, attention grabbing. Calm feels boring to people who are used to chaos, but to an older man, calm feels like safety. That's why older men often say they're not feeling it, even when everything looks fine on paper. What they mean is their nervous system doesn't feel safe enough to invest. I have a pal named Thomas. Thomas is 50. He's not emotionally closed. He's emotionally selective. He meets a woman who's attractive, intelligent, and interested. On the surface, everything looks promising. But in the first few weeks, Thomas notices small things. She escalates conflict quickly. She interprets neutral behavior as rejection. She needs constant reassurance. She frames boundaries as abandonment. She reacts before she reflects. Nothing extreme, nothing abusive, just unstable enough. 10 years earlier, Thomas would have tried to work through it. He would have communicated, he would have reassured, he would have explained, he would have adapted. Now, he quietly steps back. From her perspective, he pulled away for no reason. From his perspective, he avoided a slow bleed. This is where people get angry at older men. They say he didn't give it a chance. He didn't communicate. He didn't fight for it. But what they don't understand is that Thomas already fought those battles. Just not with her. Older men don't want to repeat lessons. They want to apply them. And that's a fundamental difference between younger and older dating behavior. Younger men believe effort can fix instability. Older men believe instability is a disqualifier. That belief doesn't come from bitterness. It comes from cost-benefit analysis informed by pain. Now, let me speak directly to you if you're watching this and you feel defensive on behalf of women. Understand this. Older men are not rejecting women as a group. They're rejecting emotional labor they've already paid for. They're not afraid of intimacy. They're afraid of losing the life they worked hard to stabilize. And that's why so many older men would rather be alone than date again. Because solitude doesn't punish them for being calm. Solitude doesn't escalate. Solitude doesn't accuse. Solitude doesn't test. Solitude doesn't destabilize. Solitude lets them exist without armor. Now let's talk about the label that gets thrown around the most in this context: emotionally unavailable. This label gets used to describe men who don't want to re-enter emotional chaos. But availability to chaos is not emotional availability. It's self-abandonment. Older men are available for peace. They're unavailable for turbulence. And that distinction matters. Let me say something that will sound harsh but needs to be said. Many men didn't opt out of dating because they don't want connection. They opted out because they don't trust the environment. Modern dating often asks men to expose themselves emotionally in spaces that don't reward stability. They're expected to be vulnerable while also being strong, to be expressive while also being unshakable, to lead while also yielding, to absorb while also providing. And after decades of that, some men simply decide the return on investment isn't there anymore. That doesn't mean they hate love, it means they respect themselves. If you're a man watching this and you felt your attraction shut down around instability, like the video because this conversation finally names what you've been feeling. Share it if you know someone who keeps mistaking calm for apathy. And comment if you've ever lost attraction, not because someone did something wrong, but because your body said no more. In the next chapter, we're going to talk about why solitude starts to feel richer than relationships, how older men build meaning without romance, and why opting out isn't always a tragedy. Sometimes it's a conscious choice. Chapter 4. At some point, solitude stops feeling like absence and starts feeling like presence. That's the part people who've never experienced it don't understand. They imagine being alone as empty, quiet in a depressing way, something you tolerate until something better comes along. For many older men, solitude becomes full, intentional, protective. And once that shift happens, dating has to compete with something it rarely beats. Let me explain that clearly. When a man has built a life that feels ordered, predictable, and self-directed, adding someone new isn't automatically an upgrade, it's a risk assessment. Will this person add calm or introduce chaos? Will they respect routines or disrupt them? Will they multiply peace or erode it slowly? That's a very different mindset from the one men have when they're younger. When you're young, you invite disruption because you're still forming yourself. You don't have much to lose yet. You're flexible. You're adaptable. You haven't built a system that depends on stability. So dating feels like exploration. When you're older, your life is a system. Sleep schedules, health habits, work rhythms, mental boundaries, personal rituals. All of that took years to dial in. And the idea of disrupting it for someone who might not last feels irresponsible. So older men don't rush to let people in. Not because they're cold, because they're careful. There's a moment when you realize your happiest days are the quiet ones, the days where nothing went wrong, the days where nobody demanded emotional processing, the days where you weren't bracing for conflict, the days where your energy stayed yours. You wake up rested. You move through your day without tension. You come home and feel relief instead of anticipation. And then someone suggests you should give that up for dating. That's when a man starts asking himself questions he never asked before. Why would I risk this? Why would I destabilize something that finally works? Why would I reopen parts of myself that took years to heal? It's not fear. It's discernment. Now let's talk about meaning, because people assume romance is the only source of it. For many older men, meaning shifts away from being chosen and toward being aligned. They find purpose in work that matters, in physical health, in mentorship, in craftsmanship, in friendships that don't demand emotional contortions, in solitude that allows reflection. Romance becomes optional, not central. That's a terrifying idea for people who anchor their identity in relationships. But for men who've been through enough, it's liberating. Samuel's 55. He was married for 20 years. The marriage wasn't abusive, it was draining. Constant negotiation, constant emotional management, constant compromise that never quite felt mutual. After the divorce, Samuel expected to feel lonely. He didn't. He felt light. He redecorated his space the way he wanted. He ate when he wanted. He traveled alone. He spent weekends reading, lifting weights, and walking without explaining himself to anyone. When people asked if he was dating, he said no. Not because he couldn't, because he didn't want to. Dating would mean reintroducing negotiation, reintroducing emotional unpredictability, reintroducing a dynamic where his peace had to be justified. And Samuel had learned something important. Peace doesn't need justification. Now let's address the criticism older men face for this choice. They get called avoidant, emotionally unavailable, commitment phobic, broken. But those labels assume that desire for partnership is mandatory, that opting out is pathological, that choosing solitude is a failure. That's not true. Some men aren't avoiding intimacy. They're avoiding instability. Some men aren't scared of closeness. They're tired of being responsible for someone else's emotional regulation. Some men aren't broken. They're finished with environments that drain them. And this is where the conversation gets uncomfortable for society. Because if a man can build a fulfilling life without romance, then romance stops being leverage. Attention stops being currency. Sex stops being incentive. Validation stops being bait. And that threatens narratives that rely on men chasing at all costs. Let me speak directly to you if you're watching this and you feel judged by it. If you're a man who's chosen peace and been told you're missing out, understand this. You don't owe anyone your participation in a system that no longer serves you. And if you're a woman watching this trying to understand why men disappear from dating, understand this too. Many men didn't leave because they hate women. They left because they found something better than uncertainty. They found calm. Now, here's the paradox. The men who opt out often become the most attractive to people who still want them, not because they're playing hard to get, because they're not trying to get anything. They're not seeking validation. They're not chasing. They're not bargaining. They're grounded. And grounded energy is rare. But by the time men reach this phase, many of them don't care about being attractive anymore. They care about being undisturbed. If this chapter is helping you understand why solitude becomes richer than dating for some men, like the video, because this conversation cuts through a lot of false assumptions. Share it if you know someone who thinks opting out means giving up. And comment if you've ever felt more alive alone than you did in a relationship. In the final chapter, We're going to bring everything together. Why opting out isn't the end of the story. When men do choose love again, what it actually takes, and why the men who would rather die alone aren't hopeless. They're just unwilling to bleed quietly anymore. Chapter 5. This is the part most people never hear because it doesn't fit neatly into a hopeful ending or a tragic one. The men who would rather be alone aren't waiting to be convinced. They're waiting to be shown something different than what they already know. And most of the time, that something never shows up. Older men don't swear off love because they think love is impossible. They swear off love because they've learned what conditional peace feels like. They've learned what it's like to be calm only as long as everything is going right, only as long as moods are stable, only as long as expectations aren't triggered, only as long as nothing stressful enters the room. That kind of peace isn't peace, it's a ceasefire. And once a man has lived long enough to recognize that difference, he stops negotiating with it. When you realize you don't feel lonely anymore, you feel complete, not euphoric, not fulfilled in a fairy tale sense, just solid, grounded, enough. And that's dangerous for dating culture. Because when a man no longer needs love to feel whole, love has to offer something more than chemistry, more than attraction, more than sex, more than validation. It has to offer safety, consistency, respect, emotional adulthood. And that disqualifies a lot of options. So when people hear, "I'd rather be alone," they imagine despair. What they don't see is relief. Relief from negotiating feelings, relief from managing emotional weather, relief from explaining boundaries that get tested anyway, relief from being misunderstood and then blamed for it. Older men don't fantasize about romance the way younger men do. They fantasize about not being disturbed. That sounds cold until you understand what they've already endured. Daniel is 60. He's had love, real love. He's also had betrayal, manipulation, emotional volatility, long stretches of walking on eggshells, years of trying to be patient while slowly shrinking himself to keep the peace. Daniel didn't wake up one day and decide to give up. He arrived there step by step, argument by argument, compromise by compromise, apology by apology. Until one day, he realized something quietly terrifying. He felt more himself when he was alone, not distracted, not numbed, not guarded, himself. So when people asked if he was lonely, he didn't know how to answer, because loneliness assumes absence. And Daniel felt present. Now here's the part that matters most. Men like Daniel aren't closed forever. They're closed to repetition. If love comes again, it has to come in a form that doesn't require self-erasure. It has to arrive without chaos disguised as passion, without instability dressed up as depth, without emotional labor being framed as intimacy. For an older man to choose love again, it has to feel safer than solitude. And that is a high bar. Not because men are cruel, because solitude has already proven itself. It's predictable, it's honest, it doesn't lie, it doesn't escalate, and it doesn't punish a man for being calm. That's why so many older men would rather be alone than date again. Not because they've lost hope, but because hope, without evidence, is no longer worth the cost. If you're a man watching this and you recognize yourself in these words, like the video because naming your experience matters. Share it if you're tired of being told something is wrong with you for choosing peace. Subscribe if you want more conversations that speak to lived reality instead of romantic myths. And if you're a woman watching this and this video challenged your assumptions, sit with that discomfort. Not defensively, curiously. Because understanding this perspective isn't about blame. It's about recognizing what men are actually responding to. I'll leave you with this. Men don't opt out of love because they hate connection. They opt out because they finally learned the difference between love and endurance. And once a man experiences peace without conditions, he won't trade it for potential ever again. Not because he can't love, but because he refuses to bleed quietly for it.